But let's get to Alabama at Kentucky. Also, very bizarre point spread from Vegas, only 10.5 points. Kentucky did play one of its most complete games of the season last week, both offense and defense. I'm hopeful that Devin Leary can read his wristband now. There's a chance that, of course, he was pretty banged up last week against Mississippi State, but one of their better performances. Alabama, of course, coming off a huge win against LSU. Potential letdown is certainly a factor, but this Bama team is getting better and better and better and better. The defense we know is good. Jalen Milroe is playing a lot of like Michael Vick with that burst. Tommy Rees is starting to inject some quarterback run into the game, which we saw last week. Certainly, Jaden Daniels made a lot of plays against that Alabama defense, but he's special and can do that. Why is Alabama only a 10-point favorite here on the road against Kentucky?
Well, I think first of all, some of us might be taking Alabama to cover this week, so let's go ahead and get some big game hunting out of the way before we get to the breakdown. But I think probably it's the letdown factor and the consistency that Alabama has not had at times this year. We think about the Arkansas game, where they let Arkansas come back, but I do think even considering the letdown, considering the lack of consistency, this Alabama team, we've talked about it earlier this show, how much better they've gotten since the start of the season. It's been Jalen Milroe's development. I do think you can beat this defense through the air. They've shown against Texas and LSU, you can throw the ball on Alabama secondary, but you've got to be able to protect your quarterback enough to do so. And I think for Kentucky, that's sort of the problem here. Speaking of consistency, they haven't had it offensively. Some weeks it's been Ray Davis. Some weeks we saw Devin Leary the last couple of weeks has played better, but they have been able to mesh the two together. And some of that is just the matchups and all that. I know what you said about Mississippi State and Kentucky. They played a great game. I think Mississippi State's pretty bad, though. And I think that factors into it. So I love the fact for Kentucky, it's in Lexington, the letdown factor, but the matchups really favor, obviously, Alabama here.
Alabama 21-7 over LSU in the second half, 27-0 over Tennessee in the second half, 16-3 over Texas A&M on the road in the second half, 18-3 against Ole Miss in the second half. Great coaches and great teams find ways to adjust and stop what you do well and win in the second half. And Alabama, outside of the Arkansas game, which they did not do well because they got up big and then they kind of like clearly exhaled. And by the way, yes, Jaden Daniels and Quinn Ewers were capable of throwing on Alabama secondary.
I know, obvious. I know.
Devin Leary is not in that category.
But Kentucky does have one of the better trios of receivers in the SEC, though.
Agreed, but they've been inconsistent. They've been open. Right. Against Georgia, they were open, and Devin Leary could not hit them. So I'm concerned more about the quarterback's accuracy and taking advantage of that secondary that you're talking about. Again, they needed Quinn Ewers, who had a near-perfect football game going down the field, and Jaden Daniels, a guy that if he doesn't get hurt, might be your Heisman frontrunner right now. That's a pretty high bar for Devin Leary to get to. I've spent all week looking at this number going, why on earth would I take Kentucky plus 10.5 in this game? Yes, it's at home. Yes, the defense is solid. Yes, they're a fundamentally sound group that could pressure Jalen Milroe because we know, again, Alabama's going to give up some pressure to the quarterback. But as much as Tommy Rees takes heat, and he should be under some criticism for how they've performed this year, he has dialed up deep shots at exactly the right time for the entire season. His quarterback and offense has gotten better the entire season. Bond and Burton and the rest of those guys are open whenever he needs them to be. And all of a sudden, his quote, I believe, to Brad Nessler on the broadcast was, when asked about Jalen Milroe running the football, he said, just wait, it's coming. And then Jalen Milroe did everything against LSU that he did for the entire season combined. More rushing yards in that game and touchdowns than he had the entire season combined. So now you have to look at Tommy Rees and say he's done everything that you've kind of wanted him to do with development of Jalen Milroe. For the life of me, I cannot come up with a reason to take Kentucky plus the 10.5 other than home defensive line. And those are the two that I can come up with.
It could be an ugly, low-scoring start for Alabama. It may take them a half to get going. One of the bigger weaknesses on Kentucky's team this year has been the secondary. So to your point, Jalen Milroe and a few bombs in the second half may help them. Also, too, I think you're giving Tommy Rees credit, and rightfully so. I think it's smart for Alabama to save those type of running plays, save the wear and tear on Milroe until you need it. So the game against LSU, save it now for the SEC championship, because you're going to need him to beat Georgia. You're going to need that mobility. So it is smart just to maybe how they're using him and not trying to add to that wear and tear over the course of the season. But, like I said, Kentucky needs the combination of Leary and Davis, and they need a defensive effort that's, especially to contain Milroe through the air, something that they haven't been good at this season to win this game. It would be a huge game and a huge win for Mark Stoops if they can pull this one off, though, to get Alabama at their place and beat them. But to me, the matchups here just favor Alabama. And I also, on Tommy Rees, I think the offensive line and run game, they've shown signs in the last couple games that they're maybe starting to turn a corner. They're not there yet, but it does feel like maybe they're finding themselves a little bit more as the season goes on. So it only adds to the challenge of for Kentucky to beat Alabama.
Yep, I agree. Give me the Tide minus the 10.5. We'll get to bets against the spread in just a second. You taking the Tide?
I am taking Alabama to win, and I'm also taking Alabama to cover.